we've got a fight going on at Campbell Soup. And frankly, Campbell Soup has never been more interesting. Dan Loeb from Third Point, activist investor that we've talked about from time to time, probably best known in the recent past for the steak in Darden restaurants and coming out with the note that Olive Garden needs to stop giving away so many breadsticks.
Was he also the one who was responsible for salting the pasta water?
I think that was,
because let's be clear, that's a good observation. I mean, if you're not salting that water, we got problems.
I mean, here's the thing. Loeb, people, myself included, have poked fun at Dan Loeb in the past for various reasons. But you go back and look at that Olive Garden literature, he was right about a lot of things.
Yes.
So now it's Campbell Soup. Loeb and Third Point have nearly a 7% stake in Campbell Soup. The annual meeting for the company is November 29th. Loeb is looking for no less than trying to replace all 12 members of the board of directors.
All at once.
All at once.
Clean house.
In one fell swoop, and no shrinking violet. He and his team put together a video just mocking Campbell Soup. I haven't watched it yet. I haven't clicked on it yet. But it's, as I said, Campbell Soup has never been more interesting. And you look at how challenged packaged food is. This is one of those things where I'm not rushing out to buy Campbell Soup, but I could see a bunch of people looking at Loeb's track record, which has, sure, it has some negatives. Every investor has negatives in their track record, but he's got some positives. And I could see people looking at this saying, oh, maybe I'll take a whack at this. Maybe maybe he doesn't replace all 12, but he agitates, he gets a few spots on the board, and they can boost this thing because it's a really troubled business right now.
It is, and it sounds like he's going to have probably a lot of trouble doing that because from what I've seen, it sounds that most of the family-owned stake of the business is still against what he's trying to do. But, I mean, to your point about that video, I didn't watch the video. I saw one line that he threw in there, which is it made me laugh because he's just really playing this up. It's kind of Hollywood. He's like, it's time to empty the can, refresh the recipe, and restore shareholder value. And it's like, that's his threat level midnight moment, right? It's cleanup on aisle 5. I feel like he's just really resorting to not hyperbole, but just taking it maybe a little over the top. Because here's the thing. I don't know that. Let's assume that he gets control of this business. What do you do? Because I don't know that it's so plainly obvious, right? I mean, they've been more or less passed in a lot of ways by this newfangled sort of packaged food environment that's out there. A lot of brands out there that resonate with younger consumers now. And Campbell isn't necessarily one of them. I think they did make that big Snyder's Lance deal, I think last year it was. And I think that actually resulted to carry about $4.5 billion in goodwill on their balance sheet. A lot of it came from that. But that represents like a third of the company's total assets. So to me, I mean, they're clearly challenged on the revenue side. The answer is not just as simple as, well, we're going to do this, this, and this. I mean, empty the can, refresh the recipe, and restore shareholder value. What does that mean? That doesn't mean anything, right? That's not a plan. That's just a bromide, so to speak. But so I don't know. I mean, I feel like he's getting in there and trying to shake things up. I understand that. I appreciate it. Oftentimes we see folks like this who perhaps are a little overconfident, maybe think they know a little bit more than they do. I'm not a shareholder in Campbell. I'm glad I'm not a shareholder in Campbell, and this does not make me want to be a shareholder in Campbell.
Well, and when you look back at what he did with Darden Restaurants, the parent company of Olive Garden, you could look at that and say, all right, operationally, there are some changes that can be made. In the case of turning around Campbell Soup, I don't see how that happens without, for lack of a better term, financial engineering. I don't see how you turn around Campbell Soup unless you make some significant changes to the cost structure of the business.
It could be something like a Sears story here, right? I mean, you just maybe the answer doesn't really exist. I mean, perhaps it is just whittling down the business and focusing on what really makes money. I do appreciate his perspective that former leadership was overpaid made and didn't deliver, I think that's spot on. But I think that part of the problem is that just the solution isn't so easy. And we've talked about it all the time here on the show. I mean, that is a tough line of work because ultimately you really do have to focus on offering very low cost goods, right? I mean, you don't really maintain a lot of pricing power in this realm. The Snyder's Lance acquisition, I mean, that is right up my alley. I mean, you're talking about chips and pretzels and peanuts and all that stuff. And that's, man, I love it. But that also is something that doesn't necessarily hold the same weight as it does today. So then you look at something like a PepsiCo, which has really been able to benefit not only from the salty snack side, but the beverage side as well. And I think that ultimately is what this all boils down to, is consolidation in this space in one shape or form. And I think that Campbell probably is headed down that road, and at some point or another here. But I don't know that Loeb is going to have his way ultimately here, because it sounds like the votes may be stacked against him.
And to go back to something you said before and something I said before when you were talking about activist investors sometimes feel like if they've had some success, they feel like they know a little bit more than they actually do. Tie that to Campbell Soup, never been more interesting than it is right now. And yet, I just want to caution the dozens of listeners. You and I were talking about this earlier this morning. One of the ripple effects of the bull market that we've had is that people like Dan Loeb, people like Bill Ackman, who we talked about recently with his investment in Starbucks, activist investors and hedge fund managers who have done well in this bull market have more money to throw around. And so it's one more reason for investors to do a little bit more homework. I saw a note this morning about a private company hiring Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan Chase to handle their IPO. And one of the lines in the story was one of the investors in this company, it's a company called Beyond Meat. And
I read about that.
And one of the investors is Bill Gates. And you could see an investor out there saying, oh, well, Gates is investing. Maybe I should take a look at it. Well, take a close look at it, because Bill Gates has all the money in the world.
Yep.
And this is a rounding error for him in terms of his investments. And it's the same thing with Loeb and Bill Ackman and other activist investors. As they do well, they have more money to throw around, more opportunities to try and turn companies around, and not all of them are going to work.
No, they don't. And I mean, they have the ability to take on more risk. And I can guarantee you that their money isn't as important to them as yours is to you, because they have a lot more of it. Okay. And so that's the first thing I always think about when I look at what these people are doing. They're smart people.
They're situational money.
Right. They're situational money.
It's like whatever Bill Gates invested in Beyond Meat is pocket change to him.
Exactly. In most individual investors like us, we don't have that sort of pocket change. And so for me, I find it always interesting to see where people have their heads at, so to speak. But yeah, I think it's a good reminder to not just jump in blindly and follow what other people are doing, because it's not to say that Loeb and Ackman and all these guys aren't smart folks. They are. They're very smart guys. I mean, it's no argument there. This is not about intelligence. This is about, like you said, having more money to invest in more things. And so when you have that situation, you can take some more risks, and maybe you throw your money at 10 different investments, and the hope is that one of them ends up paying off. And so I think that's just always a good reminder for individual investors like us to just don't look to these activists as a point of optimism. It's interesting, learn from it, but be very careful before you decide to go following their footsteps.
Fun to talk about, though.
Yes, always.